Good morning, everybody. It's a great pleasure to be back in Moscow, in your beautiful city. So very briefly, what I want to share with you is how mobility is changing in cities. Actually, what we do is we look at the digital and physical and how this is changing different things in the space we live in. We also do a lot of architecture and design, but I will not focus on that today. I will focus more on the impact of technology on different types of mobility. What you see is a picture that people really used to be fascinated in the 1990s. In the 1990s, people thought that our world would become increasingly virtual, and because of that, actually physical space would be less and less important. Gilder, an American writer in the 1995, wrote, we are headed for the death of cities. Cities have leftover baggage from the industrial era. Well, never make a prediction about the future, because no prediction could have been more wrong than this one. We know the cities have been thriving over the past few years. That's a picture from Tianjin in China. China this century might build more urban fabric than all of humanity ever built. We know that since 2008, half of the world's population lives in cities, and this number might swell to 5 billion by 2030. So what has happened really is that the digital hasn't killed the need for physical space, like Gilder and many others thought, but actually digital and physical are recombining, and they're creating new potential in the space we live in. That's something that many people call like smart cities. We don't like much the term. We like to call it more like sensible city. We think the focus should be on people, not on the technology side. But it's really about bits and atoms coming together with us in the middle. And really what is happening is that we can sense information from the city much better. We can collect a lot of information. We can respond to that information. So I want to share with you a few examples related to mobility and how we can capture it in different ways. If you look at this computer, for instance, today you know everything about it. Every chip in this machine, you know where it was produced, how it moved on the planet, how it became this computer. The global supply chain is very, very well known. But a few years from now, when you stop using this machine, you sell it, at one point you throw it away, then you know very little about it. Sometimes this is what happens to it. A lot of electronics from the United States shipped illegally to Asia, from Europe to Africa. So our idea was, what if you could put a little chip onto trash and then start following trash? It's a little bit like when you go to hospital, they put a tracer in your blood and they follow it through your body. How could we do the same thing in the scale of an entire city? We couldn't find anything off the shelf, so we had to design the little chip. It's almost like a miniature cell phone. What you see here is the first deployment in the city of Seattle. 500 volunteers, 3,000 pieces of trash. We put a little tag on all of them. And after tagging all of them, we started following them. So here you see the day of deployment. 3,000 objects. After a few days, you see some of the main landfills next to Seattle. But an actually big surprise, how far some of the stuff started to travel. Sometimes in crazy, unpredictable way. Look at the trace that went to Chicago and then back to California. And still moving after 1 month or 2 months. We thought a fireworks symphony was the right music. So basically, what can you do with this? The first thing, if you're an architect, an engineer, you can get all the data and actually try to design a better system. Think about how much energy is wasted into this and how we could optimize it. If we were to have all this information, redesign not the global supply chain, which has been studied and changed a lot over the past few decades, but call it the global removal chain. The second thing that's very interesting is that all this data, if you share it with people, then people themselves can make different choices. It's about big data, it's about we know more about the consequences of what we do, and that means we can actually change our behavior accordingly. Somebody at the end of the project came to us. We were sharing all the data with volunteers and told us, I used to drink water in plastic bottles every day and then throw them away and forget about it. And actually now after the project, I know that those bottles go to a landfill a few miles from home. They will stay there forever. So because of that, I stopped drinking water in plastic bottles. The third thing we discovered was more unexpected. And that happened when a burglar came to our lab at MIT. And the poor guy stole a lot of things, including tags and computers that tell you where they go. And this is what happened. So, this was to share with you how we can understand things, how they move, but the same applies to people. When you look at this, that's a visualization of Lisbon. It's used billions of data points from taxis, and actually that shows you how a city, how we couldn't understand a few years ago, but how we can understand today. And actually, at the lab, we were one of the first groups ever to use a lot of cell phone data to map what happens in a city. I'll show you here one of our earliest projects. But I thought, I'll include it again. It's a project back from 2005, 2006. And then at the time, it was the first time we took data from cell phones for a very big city to understand what happens in it. What we were doing the experiment in the city of Rome. And what happened is actually Rome had the final of the soccer World Cup when Italy and France were playing and Italy won. So what you see here was a city. You see people with cell phones moving here and there the day of the final. Before the match, you can see the Colosseum and the river. It's the afternoon. The match begins silence. Nobody talks anymore. France scores, Italy scores. Half-time, people make a quick call and go to the bathroom. And then second half, end of normal time, first overtime. There was a famous headbutt by Zidane. You'll see it in a moment. And finally, Italy wins. And then that night, everybody went to celebrate up here. Again, the following morning, people went here. And by the end of the day, you see actually the people move here to a place called Circo Massimo, where since Roman times, people go and celebrate in the city. So you see, you can map all of this in real time about what happens in the city. So again, this tells us the ability to really understand the city, to sense the city to an extent we couldn't in the past, but also to actuate it, to transform it, to use this data for changes. So what you see is the same data I showed you before. It's about taxis, pickups, and drop-offs. What you see here is one specific place, is LaGuardia Airport. Every dot is somebody going onto a taxi or getting off a taxi. And then we started asking ourselves, what if people could share mobility more? There's so many trips that could potentially be shared. What would happen then? Then we started analyzing this in a mathematical way. When you got such big amount of data, you need to develop new mathematical tools to analyze it and test it. We developed something called shareability network to really see how many trips can be combined. And when you look at that in a place such as New York, you find something quite extraordinary, and you see it on the curves here, that basically in New York, you could cut the infrastructure by 40%, cut the number of cars by 40%, and still take everybody to destination exactly when they need to be there, give or take a couple of minutes. Now, that's if for those of you who are interested in the mathematics, there's a paper in the Proceeding of the National Academy of Science, just came out recently. But initial results came out a couple of years ago, and they came to the attention of Uber, and you might know Uber launched Uber Pool. We started working with them since then, and Uber Pool does exactly the same things, allow people to share trips. And I think we'll hear later from BlaBlaCar about the same idea on the longer trips, on the longer trajectories, but in the city itself, there's a huge potential for sharing mobility at a small, finer scale.
Just finish the drive?
We can also look at how mobility is changing because we can know more about our cars. In this project, we actually looked at frustration in the car.
I'm certainly frustrated at this point.
And using sensors in the car to really understand better how we drive.
And we're off. Jesus. Oh my God. Okay. Stop the car.
So we were just sideswiped. And right now my stress level should be through the roof. We got the information, you know, we'll have to process the data and see where it's really at.
Shit. Jesus.
So the car is becoming more and more intelligent. It knows a lot about us. It knows about where other cars are. So that's about, intelligent mobility entering physical space. And as you know, the next step is self-driving. Self-driving is reality. Many universities, such as MIT or company, Google, and many others are working, have self-driving cars. They are on the road as we speak. And this is actually what a self-driving car sees. It's almost like a three-dimensional scan of the city, similar to what the human eye does. And then if you go self-driving cars, again, everything changes. For us, the exciting thing is not the fact that you don't need to keep your hands on the steering wheel. The exciting thing is that the car can give you a lift when you go to the office in the morning, and then can give a lift to somebody else in your family, or to anybody else in the city. And again, if you combine what I was saying before about sharing the ride with this, which is sharing the car, the result of it is theoretically a city where you could reduce the number of cars by 80% and still satisfy the mobility demand of Moscow, of New York, of San Francisco, of Singapore. So think about how different those cities would look if you were to remove 8 cars out of 10 from the streets and still be able to take everybody to destination. When everything will be self-driving, we might look at other things. We might think about a system where even traffic lights might disappear. Think about something like this. Don't try it yet. But basically how intelligent infrastructure can also enter into the city. And actually again, we're working on studying this from a mathematical point of view. It's quite beautiful, even if it's quite simple, an intersection. When you study it, you can see how you can really develop a framework for more intelligent ways of managing flows of traffic as they mix and intersect. And actually the problem is that in traffic, usually the intersection is a crucial issue because there you got 2 competing flows trying to get access to the same real estate. So if you fix the intersection, you can actually make the whole city and the whole network much more efficient. Well, that was about looking at robotics and technologies and IT entering transportation. There's many other different dimensions. I want to share with you just one more. Is about drones. This is a recent project where we try to solve a very important problem at MIT on our campus. Our campus is very messy. There's a lot of buildings. Every building has a number. Sometimes people get lost on the campus. So we did this project to use drone, again, to help people move in it, especially people who get lost, such as Harvard students.
Welcome to MIT. Where would you like to go? Follow me, please. The Computer Science and Artificial Intelligence Lab is the largest research lab at MIT. And one of
To your
the world's
right,
most
the
important
Media
centers of
Lab.
information technology
To your left,
research.
the Stata Center.
Follow me, please. Approaching your destination.
You have arrived. Welcome to Sensible City Lab.
Goodbye.
Thank you.
They would like us to stand over there, and I have a few questions for you.
Sure.
I have two questions. One is it necessarily a bad thing that trash travels so much? Because other than ending up in a landfill, maybe some people can get some electronics in countries where they cannot afford it. So question number one, why is it necessarily a bad thing? And question number two, all those amazing things that allow you to analyze the situation, how do you make the next step and influence people who make the decisions to do something about it?
All right, so let me answer both questions. The first one is about trash. Well, no, I didn't say that trash and moves is a bad thing, but actually if it moves randomly or in a chaotic way, or sometimes, we made a calculation, sometimes you put more energy in it than what you will be able to ever recover, then that becomes a problem. So I think the idea is, that's an experiment. The other things we looked at have been, we released in a few weeks a follow-up project where we actually looked at the global e-waste flows. And then in that case, what you see is smuggled and e-waste, things that shouldn't go to places, were not treated in the proper way, very polluting elements, and they get shipped to Asia or to Africa. So actually, that as well you don't want to have it. So again, it's not that something is necessarily good or bad, but you want to look at that, better understand it, and based on that, try to improve the system. So that's the first thing. About the other thing is very important. It's about, how do you move from this to reality? And what we think is very important at the lab in what we do, I focus today on mobility, but as I said, we're doing also a lot of design and architecture, exploring different aspects of the physical environment we live in. And we think that the important thing is actually how you, in a certain sense, do what we call an urban demo, how you can demonstrate something, try out something. And that's really the best way to have a discussion. You do something and then, there's a feedback. People can comment on it. It's a way we together can actually discuss how we want to let our cities evolve, how to transform our cities. Then how that goes into the real world, it can go in many different ways. As I was mentioning, in some cases we got projects, and you see some of it here, where people actually then took pieces of it and implemented it. Other people, other companies, big companies or startups. In other cases ourselves, in some cases you just inspire people. Real-time Rome actually inspire other people to do startups that play with the same thing that we did in Rome, and turn it into like a real thing. In other cases, I didn't show it today, there's a project we did called the Copenhagen wheel. It's a bicycle wheel that turns every bicycle into a hybrid electric bicycle. Well, in that case, we did the project, we did the thing, and then we said, well, how do we make it a reality? And ourselves, we did a startup a couple of years ago, which is doing extremely well in Cambridge now and growing very fast. So I think, I think there's different ways, but the important thing at the beginning is actually how can we think about our cities, how they could change, and then how we can have a discussion about that. And from there, we can then see how to turn it into practice.
Great. Thank you so much.
Thanks
It was
a lot.
fascinating.
Thank you.